Conversation with Wisconsin faith and justice leaders. My name is Reverend Adam Phillips. I'm with Faith 2020. We are a Big Tent multi-faith community of friends trying to put faith on the ballot, trying to put faith and justice on the ballot this election season. And we've been having these conversations with leaders in the battleground states to talk about the intersection of faith and social justice. So I'm really grateful for this gathering today. Excited to have this event co-sponsored by Union Theological Seminary in New York City and the Riverside Church in New York. And my friend, Reverend Kevin Van Hook from Riverside is with us today. Kevin?
Yes, thank you so much, Adam. As Adam mentioned, I am the Reverend Kevin Van Hook. I at the Riverside Church in the city of New York, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Minister of Justice, Advocacy, and Change there. And I just wanted to say that we're excited to partner with Faith 2020 and Union Theological Seminary to support millennial leaders, not just in Wisconsin, but really around the country as we organize and mobilize folks in ways that really enable us all to bring our faith to the public square. And so we're definitely grateful for that. One of the things that I wanted to mention is I just wanted to say thank you for everyone who's worked tirelessly to really pull this together. I know that we're in for a treat today with amazing speakers, and so just happy to be among us or among you in that. But additionally, just to kind of introduce you to some of the work that Riverside is doing, in addition to coming along with this portion with the faith and, or the prayers and petition, Riverside, our Mission and Social Justice Commission there at our church has also decided to really help support in the efforts to mobilize folks around the country by offering a set of mini grants. And so I would really love to point everyone in the direction of our church's website. If you just type in the Riverside Church Mission and Social Justice Commission, we're giving anywhere between $250 to $1,000 worth of in grant funding to any faith-based organization that's interested in mobilizing millennial leaders for the upcoming election. So please feel free to take advantage of that. If you want to reach out to me, you can, but right there on our website, you can also just apply right there. So happy to be along this journey as we really journey towards justice together on behalf of those who live on the margins of our society. And with that being said, I want to pass things over to Fred Davey, who really needs no introduction, but he serves as the Executive Vice President of Union Theological Seminary, as well as the Chair of Faith 2020. And so with that being said, Fred, I'll pass things over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. And thanks all of you for being here this morning. I too am really pleased and privileged to have this opportunity to work with Adam and with Kevin and the Riverside Church, the senior pastor there, acting senior pastor, Reverend Michael Livingston is a longtime friend. And so it is indeed a privilege and a joy to have this opportunity to do this really important work that is supporting millennials and other young people in all of their efforts to engage in the public square, to engage around issues that are really crucial for this time, and to engage voters so that people really do participate in this election process. And as we say at Faith 2020, vote their hopes over their fears. And we really want to make that happen. We really want to help encourage people to participate in this election. And so Union Theological Seminary joins with the Riverside Church and with Faith 2020 to support millennials and young people in this effort. My task this morning is to offer a prayer. So in my role as Presbyterian minister, how's that, Kevin? I'll offer us a word of prayer. Let us pray. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who has brought us thus far on the way, thou who has by thy might led us into the light, keep us ever in the path we pray. Oh God, we pause at this time of the day, this morning hour, to give you thanks for the many ways in which you have seen us through the years. You have wiped our silent tears. You have sustained us and brought us this far along the way. And by your might, we pray that we might continue to walk in your light and be of service to those who are the least and the lost, the left out and the left behind. We ask a special blessing upon the speakers here today. We thank you for their leadership, for their contributions, for their sacrifices on behalf of the good news that you've not only called us to preach to everyone, but to live in our everyday lives. Now, bless what we do here this morning. May it be for the bringing of your kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. In your blessed and many names we pray. Amen.
Thank you so much, Fred, for that opening prayer. We are excited to have, in a few moments, a keynote from Dr. Reggie Willams at McCormick Theological Seminary. But before Dr. Willams shares, I'm really grateful that Reverend Jonathan Barker from Grace Lutheran Church in Kenosha, Wisconsin, can share. Reverend Barker has been very active in climate activism, faith and climate justice work, as well as voter registration, and had the esteemed privilege to host Vice President Joe Biden recently when he stopped through town on the campaign trail. So Reverend Barker, thanks for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Adam, for this opportunity to speak. And what a powerful group lined up today. So it is a real privilege. Well, as was mentioned, my name is Reverend Jonathan Barker. I'm the pastor at Grace Lutheran Church in Kenosha. And I'm the co-founder of Grace Welcome Center and Grace Welcome Center Pantry. Our pantry yesterday served 168 families. And we continue to be just deep in the work of bringing food into our food desert and also bring food into our community in this time of the pandemic when so many people are out of work and having a hard time finding their next meal. Everything we do at Grace is connected with our neighborhood. So we are in the uptown neighborhood of Kenosha, and our neighborhood has many challenges. Before I name the challenges, I'd also like to lift up that as those in the know who have been in communities impacted by poverty, impacted by systemic injustice know, there is so much life in beauty. There is the life and beauty of children playing and laughing in our streets. There's the beauty of children playing games outside of our food pantry, waiting to get food. And so by no means is the spirit of people broken in our community, but there are many ways that we face injustices. And so just to name a few, our church is 4 blocks away from an old Chrysler plant that's now just a big, empty, polluted field. It used to employ 10,000 people and family-sustaining wages. Now those jobs have all moved out, and what has come in are warehouse jobs that pay close to minimum wage or a little above, which has left so many of our neighbors struggling. Our elementary school is on an old brownfield site next to a corrections facility. And again, the kids there are so full of life and brilliance and have so much light and are joys to have around our church. But again, it is hard to see them have to go into that situation every day. Our neighbors, the median income around our church is $16,628, which is kind of mind-boggling low when you start to crunch the numbers between rent and groceries and power and transportation. We are located in a food desert. The closest place to get fresh food is now 2 miles from our neighborhood. And this was all before the Jacob Blake uprising. Now, many of our local businesses, unfortunately, have been burned down just blocks from our church. So there are a lot of challenges. We are trying to meet these challenges in a whole host of different ways. So as I mentioned, we have a big food pantry that tries to bring food into our community. This is a huge area of justice and need. We have been really involved with listening to our community. So we actually have been listening since 2016. We've been doing intentional listening sessions, listening around local issues and local politics. That has led to all sorts of concerns around ways that the shelter and the food pantry systems have been underfunded in our city. And we were blessed to be able to lift up the voices of our neighbors, most recently with Joe Biden coming to speak at our church. And we're honored to have him listen to our neighbors. And we felt that was very powerful and a great way to have our neighbors' voices lifted up. We've worked hard to register voters. Our mayor has flat out told us that the low participation in voting in our aldermanic district makes it very easy for our community to be ignored. So we've worked hard in 2018 and now working hard now to get voters registered. And in that quest, we are actually going to be participating in a march from Kenosha to Milwaukee around voting and justice for Jacob Blake. That's actually going to be coming up on Tuesday, October 20th. So would love to have anybody get involved with that. You can find that on Gregory Bennett Jr.'s page. That's probably the easiest way. So Gregory Bennett Jr.'s got the flyers up. And we would love to get as much of Wisconsin out marching to get voter information out and to get justice for Jacob Blake. That would be wonderful if anybody watching this can join. Again, we'll take people from all over the state, and that's coming up on Tuesday, October 20th, so just around the corner. So those are big things going on. The other big thing going on in our community right now is there's lots of conversations about how to rebuild our uptown business district. And unfortunately, a lot of our neighbors feel like they've been left out of this conversation. So one thing we're trying to do is lift up our neighbors' voices. We've been the last 2 weeks filming our neighbors give their suggestions, dreams, and hopes. And it's really powerful to be lifting up voices that oftentimes are ignored and not heard. For anybody that has communities impacted by poverty, I would just commend this, that we need to do more listening and we need to do more amplification of our neighbors' voices. There is just such a strong sense that their voices are not heard and not listened to, and therefore don't have power. So I want to really lift that up. The other thing that we've been involved with is climate activism, and really around Green New Deal mobilization. The reason for this is there is this powerful opportunity to be able to solve the climate crisis and also bring good jobs and housing benefits to our community. So we have all sorts of folks, as I mentioned, that are making at minimum wage or just a little above, that are working very hard in warehouses. We are very excited to see good paying, family sustaining green jobs come to Kenosha. And there is definitely the possibility of that with major climate green jobs legislation. We are really excited to see our neighbors have their homes and apartments retrofitted. We've worked a lot with folks to get power and utility bills either released. We were really active in getting We Energies and the rest of Wisconsin to postpone the shutoff moratorium that started at the beginning of the pandemic, because so many of our families get impacted by this. And if families don't have refrigeration or electricity, that means no refrigeration, that means no air conditioning in the summer and heat in, the moratorium kicks in before winter. But we had families with small children that were worried this fall about losing power, and are grateful for the ways that power is kept on. But all to say, we would love to see apartments retrofitted so we don't have our neighbors in the leakiest, most expensive apartments to heat in the city. And so that's another big opportunity around climate justice and justice for our neighbors. And then we also see the need for participating in a broad movement to bring climate justice and jobs to our country as we watch so many challenges in our country. I actually grew up in Los Angeles, and I still have relatives there. They haven't been able to see the mountains and haven't been able to have their windows open almost for the last month now, as wildfires that are many times more powerful than any historic fires on record have raged. And we see a tremendous need to care for our neighbors and be invested in this coming together as a community and as a nation around solving climate change. So that's a big thing. I actually wrote a book called Jesus Would Demand a Green New Deal. It tells the story of why this is important, and also outlays a 12-day fast I went on in support of that. And we know that this election is going to have a big consequences for what happens in that. And we are also getting excited for what's going to happen in 2021. Whatever happens in this election, we are going to need to more organize and mobilize, and getting excited for another longer fast come January to support this movement. So my neighbors have both a livable future, and my neighbors also have good paying, family sustaining jobs. So there's a lot going on. in Kenosha. We're really excited for anybody that wants to participate in this historic march, who wants to be involved in climate activism in January. And there is such a strong opportunity for the faith community. One thing that I hear over and over again from my neighbors is when clergy come in. We just had Reverend Jesse Jackson come in 2 weeks ago. That encourages them, it inspires them, it gives them hope that the faith community really cares and is about what our teachings proclaim we're about, which is love for neighbor and justice. So thank you very much. And again, a real privilege to be out here with you all this morning.
Thank you, Reverend Barker. Really grateful for your witness. I live in Portland, Oregon, and we've had the climate fires up here as well. So it's a real wake-up call for folks that have not paid attention. So I appreciate all of your work in Wisconsin. It's important for the whole country. We are really grateful to be with Dr. Reggie Willams from McCormick Theological Seminary. He wrote one of my most favorite books on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And he is here to share with us a special keynote address. Dr. Willams, welcome.
Thank you. I'm also ordained, so the Reverend fits.
Reverend Dr. Willams, yeah.
Yeah, that I don't use that title very often because I'm in a seminary setting. So thank you for having me and for the opportunity to spend time with you all. This is the Panther, and I'm in Wakanda, just in case you're wondering, on my screen here. Yeah, I see you, brother. Wakanda forever. So I've been going back and forth with what to share with you in the brief time that I have with you. But since I'm piping into connection with Riverside and Union, and I've written on Bonhoeffer, I might as well talk with you for a few moments about Bonhoeffer and specifically his time there in order to do a couple of things. One, we are in one of the most challenging political moments of our lifetime. In this moment, I'm not speaking to people who don't know that. I completely recognize that we are somewhat of an echo chamber right now as we speak about the challenging political moment that we exist in. But you also have influence beyond this community group. And within our various circles, sometimes we wrestle with people who get paralyzed because there isn't a pure and clear representation of the hope, the political hope that we expect. If the candidate that is the only option for us right now doesn't speak 100% in the direction that we are going, some of us get paralyzed and don't know what to do, how to move the needle in the direction that we want. While on the other side, there is lots of compromise because they have fewer goals that become undebatable. They become imperatives. And it's really when you have a situation like that where they have a few imperatives that makes injustice so easy. Actually, maybe even a possible good outcome to move forward with a political agenda. So what is for us? What does our faith speak to us? How does our faith speak to us about the imperatives that we must engage in public? How does faith guide you in that? And I thought we would talk about that after discussing maybe for a minute similar moment that we could all identify as deeply problematic. And that's where Dietrich Bonhoeffer comes in, because he becomes somebody that a lot of people can recognize as doing the right thing in the context of an overtly racist state. And I would argue, of course, I think as many of us would say, we live in one right now, overtly racist. Let me start here. I'm going to start with him in prison in his final years of life. In 1943, he's in prison in Tegel military prison. It's awful. The prison is terrible. People are taken from there and beheaded. People are killed there in the prison as well. When they find out that he's got family who are important people in Berlin, he starts getting favors and they're embarrassing for him, but he's still in prison and he's listening to awful suffering. He writes several poems, including many letters and so forth, but I want to read to you one poem in which he lets his guard down a bit and he's describing some of the struggle as we begin this conversation. It's called Night Voices. I'm in the middle of it here. This is just a couple of, this is just a stanza, a couple of stanzas. Night and silence, only the guard's steps and shouts. Do you hear? The quaking, bursting, crashing in the silent building when hundreds stir and fan their heart's embers into flames. Mute is their chorus, wide open my ear. We the old, we the young, we the sons of every tongue, we the strong, we the weak, we the watchful, we who sleep, we the rich and we the poor, all alike in calamity's hour. We the bad, we the good, wheresoever we have stood, we whose blood was often shed, we witnesses of the dead. We the defiant and we the resigned, we the innocent and we the maligned, tormented by long loneliness in heart and mind, brother, searching and calling are we, brother, can you hear me? Again, the poem is called Night Voices. There in prison, he hears them like he had heard them when he boldly, and some would say blatant disregard for his own life's well-being, confronted the Nazis, knowing that they were a murderous regime. I'm going to share my screen with you, and we're going to touch on another couple of things that happened in prison. I'm going to go starting with him in prison. I'm going to move in a direction of comparison between what he's interacting with to make some, to hopefully draw some analogies for our own moment for discussion. Let's see. All right. So I'm going to keep my PowerPoint notes up because I'm going to be moving around here a bit. It doesn't look so clean and pretty on the screen. I apologize, but I don't have my notes in front of me, but I want to share with you this here. This he writes in 44. This is after a while, after a year in prison, after the coup attempt fails in July of 1944. There's an attempted coup that fails. And he starts turning towards writing a book. He asks a question and makes a statement. What do we believe, we really believe? I mean, believe in such a way that our lives depend on it. And that's a question for us. What do we believe? Such that we stake our lives on it. Then he makes this statement: the church is the church only when it is there for others. This claim of being for others is both noun and verb. Jesus is there for us both in what Jesus does and who he is. And the church, as Christ's body, is what the church does, as well as who it is. It's there for others. But what do we believe? such that we would stake our lives on it? What do you need to believe in order to see evil when it's staring you in the face? That would be the meat of this claim that the church is there for others. Therefore, meaning being for, and then this others. Who are others? Well, let's take a look here. First of all, this is a cool picture. This is a little statue outside of as you enter the town where Bonhoeffer was killed. This exists there. It was in a mining town. Flossenburg was a prison camp where they worked people to death. But this is really what he's facing. The logic of human difference is what animated a Nazi imagination of society. When you look, you see this iceberg here. I use this as a definition, as a way of describing what we understand as human difference. We make a distinction when we talk about racism, an important distinction between being and doing. And that distinction is harmful because it doesn't help us to address the problem at its root. Racism is usually defined by negative behavior or thoughts about people who are different than us. In this regard, anybody can be racist. It's hating or disliking people of different races, thinking of them as less than us. Well, one of the things that does is it misses the origin of the ideology. Racism is the invention, in fact, it's the invention of white people. It is a process of creating human difference in order to esteem a type as normal. Racism is white supremacy. It's white supremacy. That's what racism is. And racism is longing for idealized space, inhabited with idealized people, white. So what happens to people of color is the tip of the iceberg. What's under the water is what is really going on, and that is the manufacture and maintenance of systems and structures for whites only. That's what racism is. In Germany, Bonhoeffer was dealing with its local rendition of whites only space as the Aryan. And I apologize, it sounds like my neighbor is doing some serious construction work just outside my window. My apologies. Right when I get to teaching here, my God. I hope it's not too loud.
It's not too loud on our end, so.
Okay, good.
Sounds good, yeah.
Yeah, there's a tractor outside my window. Anyway,
Wow.
The local rendition of that in Germany is the Aryan. And here, this is a picture of Arno Brecker's, Arno Brecker is the sculptor for the Nazis, and he develops this image for them, the spirit of the Nazi. Clearly, an idealized figure who is the Germanic inhabitant of the Germanic state, of the ideal state. We see that clearly there in Nazi Germany and its siblings in the West in general, here in the United States as white, good, Midwestern American white people. But in order to have the ideal, you've got to have the enemy, the other, the negative outgroup distortion. In Nazi Germany, that is the Jew, primarily the Jew. Here are depictions of the Jew This one here, The Eternal Jew, it's actually a movie poster. Goebbels made a movie. Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, he made this movie about the eternal Jew. The eternal Jew is one cursed to roam the countryside, never to die, because they killed the Savior of the world. And then this one here, pulling back the curtain to see who's responsible for German loss and shame of World War I. It's the Jew, warmonger, war prolongerer. These are the people. This is the person responsible for the shame and loss of World War I. Now, what's interesting about a Nazi concept of race, we see present in the United States as we do in broader Western world in general. But for the Nazis, in particular dealing with Black people, because they had colonies in Africa like many of the Western powers that they gained after 1884-85 in the Berlin Conference that split up the continent of Africa into its current national boundary lines. That happened in the modern colonial, the practice of modern colonialism after the Berlin Conference. Because prior to that, it was a collection of tribal states. But they had their colonies there too, and in Nazi Germany, they did not go after African people with the same vehemence. Pure blood Africans on the continent were very few in number, and African Americans as well. But pure blood African people resembled for them the moment of their conquest. So they weren't as upset or concerned about pure blood Africans because they demonstrated German conquest. They imaged German power. They were their subjects, and they didn't try to have German citizenship like that of the Aryan. It's not their land. They are German subjects. The Jew, on the other hand, is citizen. They're not Aryan. And as citizen, they are an infection in the body politic that is meant to be pure like the Aryan. Now, if you have mixed blood, Black and German, then you've got a problem. That's a problem, and that must be exterminated. So it's the claims to citizenry, claims to this space is ours, like the Aryan. Let's pause there for a moment and contemplate how that is at work in the United States as well. Who gets to claim this space as ours? What does it mean? What is the meaning behind the pushback against Black Lives Matter? For example, to say that the goods and services of this land belong to all people, all U.S. citizens. Who gets to count? Well, as belonging. In Nazi Germany, the push is for pure and Germanic. This is infection. And in this depiction here, this picture, they show what they do with the infection. Here you see the sword through the Star of David imaged as an evil snake with all of these things coming out of the snake that are infecting the country: prostitution, terror, civil war, financial crises, and all these sort of things coming from this infection on the land of these people. So they purify the land of them. Let me show you two more things here before we turn towards conversation. Another way to look at what happened in Nazi Germany and what's present with us here in the West is the connection between Nazi Germany and the continent of Africa, which I would make right here. This is a door leading from Elmina slave castle in Ghana, West Africa. This is the original door that ambushed and kidnapped Africans passed through getting onto boats. Just on the other side here was water in the 15th through, I want to say, the 18th centuries. There's water here. They would walk through there. It's being narrowed so that only one small, famished, diminished body could pass through there at a time in chains, loaded onto boats, headed into the New World. The reason why I show this is to show the origin of this kind of thing here. And I would, if I were doing my due diligence, I would show you also depictions of Uncle Tom's and Aunt Jemima's and pickaninnies and so forth, and thugs and gangsters that are meant to do the very same thing. Here at the door of no return, ideology was attached to bodies to make sense of slavery as not only permissible, but a moral good. It is an argument for what they're doing. But what they're also doing when they're placing ideology on the bodies, or baptizing them, as it were, their bodies with this ideology of subhumanity, is they're calling forth this figure. Because what is lacking in those people who become chattel is present in the Lord's anointed. Poles are created, polarized understanding. And after slavery, instead of undoing that understanding of humanity that was set up in that process of buying and selling African people, they doubled down on it in various ways. That ideology that was present here at the door was present in the creation of Jim Crow in 1896 with Plessy versus Ferguson. It's present in 1933 when Hitler comes to power. It's already there. It's present in 1884-85, the split up the continent of Africa. It's present in 1942 when they make the decision for the final solution. 41. It's present in 1943 when I read this letter to you. And it's present in 1945 when Dietrich Bonhoeffer is hanged at Flossenburg. It's present here in 2020 when Donald Trump says, build that wall. So the question for us then, back to where we started, what do we believe? What do we really believe? Believe in such a way that our lives depend on it. And in our context, how must the church be there for others? I'll stop there so we can maybe discuss. We can have some dialogue back and forth as well. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. It was incredibly helpful, I think. I had an opportunity to go to the Elmina slave castle in Ghana back in 2010, and I can't remember the exact geography of the space, but I do remember that there is a chapel on the grounds, and I think the chapel is literally on top of that room you shared, or at least adjacent to. And it got me thinking about Bonhoeffer's Letters and Papers from prison and his call to a religionless Christianity, because religion had been so manipulated during the Third Reich. So I wonder if you could maybe just share about that for a moment and reflect on our kind of present moment too, where, the president is out there saying that he's going to save Christianity, save God, save religion. And he's got plenty of enablers that support that. But thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there are 3 slave castles in Ghana. One is not really used. I mean, one is not very visited. You mainly see it from the outside. So that one, people don't even talk about that one. Then there's Cape Coast Slave Castle, which when you walk into the men's dungeon, you walk right under the windows for the Anglican chapel. The Anglican chapel is right on the men's dungeon, on top of the men's dungeon. You can see that one there. At Elmina, there is a chapel on top of the women's dungeon.
Yeah.
And the one where I showed you, that one, it's right on top of the women's dungeon. It's Dutch. That was Dutch when it was shut down. Cape Coast is British. So those are the awful realities of people suffering literally, worshiping literally on top of human suffering. What kind of Christianity must you have to be able to worship in the proximity of such overwhelming suffering? Feces up to the knees, no place to sit or lay, decaying bodies and so forth, languishing in chains for months there. Is worshiping right on top of that. So that's those spaces. You were talking about religionlessness. Now, what Bonhoeffer uses the word religion mostly negative throughout the entirety of his career, his writing career. One time really in New York when he's writing back home where he uses the word religion positively. He's talking about religious expression amongst Black people. And that's in a positive sense. But religionlessness, one might say, think about the claims or the fears we have of secularism. It's talked about today. The concept of the sacred and the secular, an increasingly secular world. And Christians trying to retrieve a sense of religion for the public space. Bonhoeffer is basically saying we shouldn't fear an increasingly secular world. How can we think about serving Christ as an increasingly secular society? So if religion is a negative thing in his talk, in his understanding, religion is like, he uses language like individualism. It's a private public life split. People are religious in their private life, or they're individualist. Or he even uses the phrase "deus ex machina," which is God and machine, which is it's a derogatory, simplistic way of describing a plot twist that's solved too simply. So you're writing a story, you contrive a dilemma, and then you undo the dilemma really simplistically. Well, Christians look for God in their lives to undo dilemmas, primarily. It's really the simplest way of understanding the world and life, just in undoing the dilemmas that I find myself in. But it's also the way that the world was understood prior to technology and science. A spirit behind every tree and under every rock, making sense of things. But now, in a world come of age, or we might say a secular world, we've got science and we understand the world better. So you don't need God in every day. You only rely on God for those things you don't understand, pushing God out to the margins. What if we understood God in the center of the world, working even in the context of an encroaching secularism, when science and technology are there for us in describing things? In Nazi Germany, it was a primarily technical and scientific, just as it is today, one might say, advances in science push God out. And so there wasn't much for discipleship, or what you might understand as concrete claims that God makes on you on a daily basis. It's a very technical world, not a lot of compassion, so to speak. He's asking for not understanding Christ in the gaps, but understanding Christ at the center. The God who would make you, or would have us live in the world as though God does not exist, is the one that would also ask you to rely on him completely for everything. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Adam, but first of all, you got to understand that he's Christ-centered, understand religion in a negative sense, and understand secularism. These three pieces come together for him in religionlessness. A world in which Christians follow Christ at the heart of an increasingly secular society. What does it mean to try and retrieve religion today, especially when theologies and worldviews are crafted on colonialism and domination? If your Christianity comes from a time in which Christian and white are synonymous with moral and ideal, as it seems that there is no guidance for interaction with human difference, with a helpful understanding of human difference within these current configurations of Christianity. Being religionless is not only innovative, but maybe imperative to understand Christ outside of those constructs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I also think about how religion has become, especially in the evangelical world in which I, found my original vocation in some ways. It's become transactional rather than transformational. And it's not just a pithy way to think about it. It's about power and dominance and attacking the culture and starting culture wars rather than being in the world for
completely
the
in the
good.
world. That is an important that's an important recognition. Secularism would push Christians into these culture wars.
Right.
Sacred versus secular.
Yeah.
But Bonhoeffer is arguing for being completely in the world. So, for example, Dwight L. Moody says that the world is a sinking ship and the church is a lifeboat. The role of the church in this context is to pull souls out of the lifeboat, out of the sinking ship, and place them in the boat, which is the church. It's saving souls. You don't act socially, politically, any of those kinds of ways. You're thinking about people's eternal salvation. That's when the world, your existence in the world, is comfortable. They're not coming for your body or your being. So you can think about your eternal salvation primarily while you crush people politically. But when the political structures are set up, as I was describing for you, the definition of white supremacy, the manufacture and maintenance of systems and structures for whites only, when they're done in that way, and the people in your pews can't eat, or they don't know if their children will make it home safely, there are no laws or structures in the country that you can rely on for safety or well-being. How do you pray? What does salvation mean for a people who can't say they own their bodies? What does salvation mean for people who don't know where the next meal is coming from? Is it primarily spiritual? No, it's not.
It's such a good word, and important for us to continue to reflect on, not just through the election, but beyond into 2021 and 22. And as we live out our vocations, our callings as followers of the divine. Thank you, Dr. Willams, for your time and your teaching. We're recording this, so we'll be sharing this on our Facebook page later, Faith 2020 US. And make sure you send this to your friends and your colleagues. I think this is really, to quote another favorite theologian of mine, Kierkegaard, this has been a very upbuilding discourse. So thank you. We are joined by the Honorable Reverend Everett Mitchell. He is a Dane County Circuit Court judge. He's also senior pastor of Christ the Solid Rock Baptist Church. He's a native of Fort Worth, Texas. And Judge Mitchell believes in the idea as expressed by James Baldwin, quote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." He's a graduate of Morehouse College, Princeton Theological Seminary, and the University of Wisconsin Law School. Honorable Reverend Mitchell, thank you so much for joining us. I was hoping that you could maybe just share for a few moments your work in Wisconsin at the intersection, literally, of faith and justice.
Yeah, Adam, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate the opportunity to reach out and that I was able to fit this into my schedule to have this conversation with you. Obviously, the work that I do, both as a pastor and a judge, is that I sit at the intersections, because as a judge, you begin to realize how much injustice does exist in the world and how much these systems together really do perpetuate all of the types of things that Dr. Willams talked about, regardless of race and the visions of how people are perceived. And you're working tirelessly to try to get and connect those individuals with some type of resources and strength to help them overcome the barriers that systemically are put against them. And at the same time, I'm also pastor of Christ the Solid Rock. We are an open and affirming Black Baptist congregation here. And I've moved my congregation to become probably the first and only open and affirming Black congregation. As a cisgendered ally, it is very important to me to have, pushed the envelope to allow for my community to find many people who are safe and to become safe in that space. So I am, I've been on the bench and was elected to the bench in 2016. And after being elected to the bench, I have been working in juvenile justice and I'm now the presiding judge over the juvenile division for our county. So oversee child welfare cases as well as juvenile delinquency. So young people who commit crimes, and trying to come up with restorative justice practices to support ways in which we can ensure that they have futures. And then at the same time, working with my clergy brothers and sisters in our community to come up with responses to use of force paradigms that we have seen and struggle with in our community. And then lastly, I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Wisconsin Law School. So this semester, I'm teaching race, racism, and the law, to really look at the systemic ways in which the law has undergirded the kinds of racist policies that have prolonged legacies in our communities and our histories. And so really trying to get at all of those, the intersections of all those different pieces together. And so on top of being a father and a husband and all those other things too, trying to make sure I'm staying connected to those intersections.
You must be very busy. And I'm really grateful for your witness in the world. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, we talk at Faith 2020 about putting faith in social justice on the ballot this year. And we certainly have candidates in mind that we think would be good for that. But even so, we have a ton of work to do in 2021 and beyond, especially when it comes to criminal justice reform. What are your thoughts as a minister and as someone intimately involved in justice issues? What are the things that, at least maybe in Wisconsin, if not the country, we need to tackle and advocate for?
Well, I think as a faith community, one thing that we have not done a good job of is actually educating our parishioners about justice issues. right? So when we talk about the first thing, let's just talk about criminal justice reform can seem like a bucket of things that you need to work on. So we need to parse them out. I would say we could talk about, like, say, for example, how do we address police reform, specifically issues related to use of force paradigms. And so why does this keep happening, right? Collectively across the board, the reason it keeps happening is because the Supreme Court sanctions what police can be trained on and how they're being trained. If communities of faith do not know this Supreme Court case, Graham versus Connor, then that means that they don't really have the capacity to engage in a meaningful dialogue that allows for them to understand why this keeps happening. And Graham versus Connor is that Supreme Court case that frames the use of force conversation. So, I'm going around, our state and our county really teaching and talking to faith communities about, all right, it's good for you to know Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's fine for you to be able to cite the epistles of Paul. You may even know a little Bonhoeffer. But if you don't know Graham versus Connor, you're not having a current conversation. And you have to have this current conversation to give the people some analysis of knowing how to apply their faith, to know what to act on and what to do. The implications of us means that, we need to have a national, state, and local dialogue about what are the standards that we want. States can't create standards that overturn Supreme Courts. So we have to have a national conversation and, really talk about our legislatures either creating a law that overturns it or, advocating for, that, and really that's the only way you can do it, and really getting a push on our local levels to making sure that there's a certain level of training that must be involved in that conversation. And you got to have faith people in that conversation, because when we started doing police reform, I heard you have a little conversation with evangelicals. When we started having police conversations of reform for police back in 2015 in our local community, when one of our young kids, Tony Robinson, was killed by a Madison police officer, we noticed that when at that time, Black Lives Matter was just a terrorist kind of statement. So we were using that term. And we noticed that everybody who wanted to reserve racism and certain levels of policing, they ran to the evangelicals. And the evangelicals provided cover for these kind of racist policies that were hurting Black and brown communities. And so this year, after George Floyd, when we were getting ready to organize marches and protests related to George Floyd and participating in those protests, as I was organizing the march, the first thing I said to my fellow clergy, I said, listen, man, we need to make sure that we include our evangelical brothers and sisters, because we didn't do that back in 2015, but we need to do that here, right? We need to make sure that they feel comfortable with the idea. And so we have big evangelical churches that, I'll be in there talking to their pastors. I jump into their Facebook chat rooms to talk to some of their members who were concerned. I would show up in these different spaces to help, to assist them in this process of understanding that what we're asking for is not a crazy thing, right? And so some of their pastors, after we talked about it, they felt committed to speak on issues of race and racism and what it looks like. They weren't always the best at it, but but at least they were at least willing to engage in a conversation, right? To put it on, to at least put it inside the broadcast was a tremendous win for us to at least have that conversation. So, including all these different paradigm shifts and conversations are important. Protests are not anti-American, it's not anti-police, it's pro-love, it's pro-safety, it's pro-community. Controlling the messaging is important, especially in faith spaces, and connecting that message with, the ministry of Jesus and the commitment that Jesus had for everybody else. I keep telling them, people were talking about, I don't know, I don't feel good about protests. I said, what do you think the triumphant walk of Jesus is into Jerusalem for the first time? If you don't think that was a protest, he was on a horse, with all these people throwing stuff down in the streets, him going into the temple, kicking over the temple, talking about y'all done turned the house of God that's supposed to be a house of prayer into a den of thieves. I said, that was a protest. He shut down the economic structure of the people right there in the temple. I said, that's called a protest. That's called shut it down. If we don't get what we want, we shut it down. I said, so if you are not protesting, in my mind, you're not even representing Jesus, because Jesus was the main protester of his time. That's why he was pissing off people, and that's why they had to kill him. And so that's why I think connecting people with real ideas about what they can do with their faith will only enhance their overall understanding of what is possible of connecting faith with these issues, especially with criminal justice reform, because it seems so big. But I'm trying to help people understand it's not as big as you think it is. It's only big because they keep making it seem like it's a myth and it's so you can't touch it. But people like me are trying to translate that into a way so that everyday people can see it and then say, okay, we can touch this, we can change this, we can do something different about it.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much. Now, are you all doing Zoom church, or how are you doing church these days? Are you meeting in person, or what's going on?
Man, I do two types of churches. So I don't do Zoom church. It depends on too many people's Wi-Fi. So we do streaming it over Facebook. We have a courtyard. So after George Floyd was killed, like, I ain't gonna lie to you, I wanted to just kind of, do the kind of, Zoom, Facebook. But after George Floyd was killed, man, I needed to bring my community together. So we went to the local school that's across the street from my church. And then they just let us use an outlet, and we just sit up there and have people come in. And I would tell people, come in any way you can, either in your car, bring a lawn chair, something like that. And so we've been doing courtyard services for months. It's gonna get cold, as you know, up here in a few minutes. But so we're trying to figure out what's next. But no, man, I had to bring my people together, man. So every week we've been together with masks on and preaching, doing Facebook, all that good stuff.
It's so good. Well, thank you so much for your time and your witness. We'll continue to pray that your church is safe and healthy, but also together in community for this really important time where we are striving for the kingdom of God and for social justice.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you. We're also joined by Pastor Raymond Monk from Ephesians Missionary Baptist Church, who knows a thing or two about prayer and protest, prayers and petitions. He was instrumental in leading those efforts in Milwaukee this summer and continues to serve the community at the cross-section of faith and justice. So I was hoping that he could just share a little bit about what's been going on in Milwaukee and how we can be lifting them up as well. Pastor Monk.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here today. As you can see, my walk with Jesus Christ is authentic. I walk with Jesus, and I also wear the green and gold proudly here in the state of Wisconsin. So it's so good to have so many brothers and sisters that are here from Wisconsin. But here in Milwaukee, the civil unrest has caused the church in Milwaukee to become much more united. Where there were divisions along racial and denominational lines. Some of those barriers, not all, but some of them have been able to come down, to be united around police brutality that's taken place here in our city. Here in Milwaukee, our greatest challenge now is continuing to keep the church energized to meet the needs of the citizens here in our city. So voting is one, but we got a real serious problem up ahead that we need to be proactive to respond to and not reactive. This pandemic on top of the racial unrest, we have many individuals across our city that will be facing eviction or foreclosure on their homes. And we have a city that is not properly prepared for an influx of people who will become homeless. In regards to justice, there's also the need for our church to continue to advocate for our young people who are, in our city, we have bars and restaurants open, but schools are closed. And talking with families that are affected in a major way because of this, it's heartbreaking. And one of the things that we really need prayer for is the equipping of the parents to help educate their children. Unfortunately, the school system isn't going to give them a pass on, or they may just push them through, but our children will not be properly prepared to continue on in their academic pursuits. And so with that being said, it's a challenge because in our city, we have a few churches that have the resources and the facilities to be able to help, but it's still not enough with the challenges that our city is faced with. We have the highest incarceration rate of one of the zip codes here in the city of Milwaukee, 53206, where the majority of the men who live in that community have been incarcerated at one point or another throughout their adult lives. We have high unemployment. We also need prayer for in our state, where the largest percentage of unemployed people in the state of Wisconsin live in the city of Milwaukee. However, our state government will provide TIF funds to support business expansion in the suburbs, which causes many of the individuals, our Black and brown individuals who live in the city, that in order to secure a job with a family sustaining wage, have to leave the city of Milwaukee to do that. And for some of them, transportation is a challenge also. Excuse me. So our city is faced with quite a bit that definitely needs to be attended to. To help with that, we as a church, we've been very involved, as you mentioned, in bringing attention to the challenges in our city. We've, prior to the George Floyd unrest, we've worked with an organization called Milwaukee Basics to host what's called Front Row Seat, which is an opportunity to bring together our white and Black and brown brothers and sisters together to discuss race. We helped to organize bringing together a little over, it's been estimated around about 2,000 to 3,000 people in less than 24 hours, shortly after George Floyd was brutally killed. And there was major unrest here in the city of Milwaukee. And now our efforts have shifted towards voting. That for us as a church, we're committed that by the end of October, we started in September to touch 10,000 homes to help educate, make sure individuals are registered to vote, and even just assisting with helping to get them to the polls if necessary, to remind them of that right, but also keeping in front of them other challenges that are in our city and how we can work together to address them. So that's pretty much it about what we need here in the city of Milwaukee and what's been happening here.
Thank you so much, Pastor. Really grateful for your work in the world. It's so important. We are privileged to also be joined by Jonah and Cameron Overton of Zao MKE Church. Jonah and Cameron have been doing really wonderful work as church planners, as well as advocates for inclusion and intersectionality. I first learned about their efforts through Vote Common Good, and so really grateful to have them with us today. Jonah and Cameron, I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about what you all are doing, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you so much, Adam. It's a real honor to be here with all of you. And the work that we have in front of us is mighty, but it's incredible to be amidst folks who are following their faith into the streets in 1,000 different ways. And that's really all that we do at Zao MKE Church. We began just a few years ago in a River West living room in the city of Milwaukee. And really, we're a church built by people who are traditionally excluded from church spaces. So Cameron and I are both out as queer and trans people, as the two pastors of our community. And we are engaging a lot of millennials, a lot of people who are outside of traditional church systems, but deeply longing for spiritual hope and connection, community, and identity. And so Zao is kind of what the church looks like when people who have been excluded from church are put in charge of church. And what that means for us is that every time we gather, we articulate over and over again to one another to remind ourselves of our mission and our understanding of the gospel, that we are Jesus-rooted, justice-centered, and radically inclusive. And to us, what that means is that as Christians, rather than following an American Christianity modeled off of a sort of white, blonde, blue-eyed Jesus, we like to call him Precious Moments Jesus, instead of following that caricature of Jesus, we follow the brown-skinned Palestinian peasant Jewish organizer who absolutely agreed with some of the comments made was a person of protest, is a figure of radical political movement and hope and of prophetic imagination for the future. And so when we follow that Jesus, the Jesus we see depicted in the Bible, the Jesus that we meet in our hearts and in one another and in the streets, we are moved towards a center in ourselves, in our community, in our world of justice. And the work of justice is fundamental to understanding the kingdom as it is called into being and as we are called into building it. So our work then looks towards radical inclusion, a radically inclusive future where all are made whole and all are united together. And we have a long way to go before we get there. So what is that, what does following in the path of Jesus mean for us in Milwaukee in this time among young people, again, traditionally excluded from church spaces? So for us, that prophetic imagination that drives everything we do means that our seeking after God is both spiritual and relational, as well as material. We think that Jesus says, many will call me Lord, Lord, but do as I command. And so for us, the call to do as Jesus commands drives us into the streets, drives us to the work of activism, the work of engagement. And for those folks who would say that, we're supposed to keep religion and politics separate, that would have been totally anachronistic to Jesus himself, who was bound up in those religious political systems that defined who was able to thrive in the world. And that still happens now, the ways that the church and our powers and principalities end up colluding so that some are able to thrive at the expense of others. And so our call is to follow Jesus into a different kind of kingdom and an anti-empire that builds a solidarity on the recognition that all are children of God, and then advocates relentlessly for one another. And that has manifested in some really practical ways for us. We've been in the streets since our inception. We take to the streets on behalf of every kind of liberation that the gospel gives us hope for. So that includes the rights of trans people, the rights of immigrants and refugees, and of course, we've been in the streets constantly for the movement for Black lives. But we have also, as we have grown and moved out of that living room and into a theater venue, and now we are, though we are exclusively online for the safety of our community, we actually call an old church building our home now. We've been there for about a year. And so we've been thinking about how to bless the community based on the material resources that we have to throw everything we have behind that vision for liberation and what our community actually deserves. So I'm going to let Cameron speak more specifically to how that's played out in our community.
Yeah, so when all of the uprisings started to occur after the murder of George Floyd, because we were in the streets, we said, hey, community, we now have this material building. What can we do? Organizers, what do you need? And over, we heard we need to keep this movement going. So the organizers of Milwaukee said, we want to march for 200 days. And we said, how do we support you in that? And so our building remains closed for Zau's purposes, but we decided to fling open our building doors to the community. So originally that was to say, hey, if people, police were kind of using military tactics on the protesters. And so originally it was, if we need to be sanctuary space, we will do that. Once we started going further and further into the marching, we partnered with a lot of people to start a supplies depot. And so at this point, our building is open and we are staffing it basically 24 hours to say, if there are needs, if there is a protest that arises, we have the supplies for you. And so we had our whole entire gym space just littered with, snacks, water, food, medical supplies. We housed a medical training for like street medics who said, we really want to bring more people into this movement to be able to keep these marches going. And so that has expanded in many different ways. We've made sandwiches and bag lunches, and we have cars coming into Zao and out right away needing supplies for the streets. But anything that has been needed for the community, we have tried desperately to kind of house at Zao to make sure that we are supporting the efforts of all the movement that is happening here. And I think what was really exciting about that is, one, partnering with the community. It continues to evolve because the needs continue to evolve, but Zao as a community also was, when we brought this to our leadership team, they were like, yeah, this is who we are. It is in our DNA. This is who we say we are going to be. And so that's who we must be. And I think what's really exciting about that is the community then itself is saying, like the Milwaukee community is saying, wow, is this what faith is supposed to be? And we are like, yes, this is the Jesus that we follow. That's our first cornerstone of who we are at Zao. And we believe that this is how the church should be. And so it is really exciting to see that the community is having different conversations about what it would look like if all faith leaders were doing similar work, who were caring about intersections, who are saying Black Lives Matter, instead of seeing that as a terrorist slogan, like you said, Honorable Mitchell. But I think it's a fundamentally different conversation when we're saying this is what Jesus would have wanted. So I think at this moment, that's the biggest thing that we are doing at Zao is the supplies depot. We've had the privilege and opportunity to partner in Kenosha when Justice for Jacob Blake is happening. We are in Wauwatosa right now. We have, contacted other church buildings and said, hey, we're doing this supplies depot in Milwaukee. How can we get a supplies depot up and going in Wauwatosa, so that as we're asking for justice for Alvin Cole, that this would be a continued and easy thing to happen for the Wauwatosa community. So yeah, it is so important for us to be doing this kind of work as we continue to make sure that justice is happening within our streets.
Thank you so much, Cameron and Jonah, for that work that you're doing, which is truly ministry of the kingdom of God, as we've been talking about. Really grateful. You have been with us here at Faith 2020's conversation on the intersection of faith and justice with millennial leaders in Wisconsin. Prayers and petitions as we forge the future. My name is Reverend Adam Phillips. I'm Executive Director of Faith 2020, and we are a big tent multi-faith effort to mobilize and put faith and social justice on the ballot this November. You can learn more about our work in the world at faith2020.org, or follow us on social media at faith2020US. And as we think about the election and we think about important states like Wisconsin in this election, we think about all the work nationwide we'll continue to need to do, whomever is elected into 2021, as we look forward into better days. And that will take all of us. So incredibly grateful for these special guests. We will lift them up, hold them in the light as they seek the light of justice in our world. Gratitude as well to Riverside Church, New York City, and Union Theological Seminary in New York. And special thanks to my friend, Mark Fraley, who helped me organize this event. Blessings, y'all, and look to stay in touch down the stretch. Take care. Bye.